Next, we move to the strategy multipliers. Now, we talked about the product strategy and we looked at the business objectives, right? Business objectives are the goals that the company has set for a particular planning cycle, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. Product managers are the people who are responsible to make sure that you're building things, you're building products that will make the company achieve these targets, these objectives, right? So it should also reflect in your prioritization framework. And that is what these strategy multipliers do. So strategy multipliers are those weightages that are used to amplify the impact of features that align with your business objectives. And it kind of makes sense, right? So let's say if there are 3 features, and out of those 3 features, there is one feature that really kind of is aligned with the business objective. Uh, there should be some way for you to amplify the impact. How do you know that this particular feature really aligns with your objectives? All you did was you had a product strategy and then you tried to map the impact that features have based on the product strategy, which is all fine, but then objectives are different. So you need to also make sure that the objectives are keyed into the prioritization as well. So the strategy multipliers, they reflect the alignment of feature with the objectives. Each business objective should have a defined and agreed upon weightage. When I say a defined and agreed upon weightage, what it means is if you have, let's say, 2 or 3 business objectives which have been put in place for your particular department, your product line, you have to make sure that for each one of the objectives, you discuss with your leadership, you discuss with your executives, and you give the right weightage numbers to them. So I'll give you an example. So let's say for your company, for your product, let's say there are 2 business objectives. One is to maximize the revenue, and second is to get some new customers on board, customer acquisition, right? Now, they might not be equally important. When you talk to the executives, maybe you'll get an idea that maximizing revenue is much important than acquiring new customers. Both of these may be business objectives, but maybe one of these business objectives is much higher in terms of priority or importance than the other one. And that is where this multiplier comes into picture. You want to work with your leadership to get an alignment on what that weightage number should be. So in this example that you see, there are 3 objectives, 1, 2, and 3, and the multipliers that you have put is 1, 2, and 3 in that order, 3 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. By looking at it, it is clearly visible that the objective 3 is the most important because it has the highest weightage, and then objective 2 and 1 in that order. But it is not necessary that it needs to be in that order. Objective 3 could be 3, objective 2 and 1 could be 1 and 1 each, because it all again depends on the relative importance of these objectives. So the second point here, which is each objective should have a defined and agreed upon weightage, is very important. When you're doing this exercise in a company, make sure that you have a word with your leadership, your senior product folks, maybe business owners, and try to get the right weightages for these objectives. And then most often what happens is that objectives keep on changing, right? Because again, the business dynamics is fluid, the way in which the company is operating, that changes. So you should tweak these weightages, the multipliers, to represent the most accurate and most recent objectives. So in case there is a change in the priority for the company, make sure that you're going back to the multiplier table and you are changing, you're making the right changes, right? Now get stakeholders aligned on multipliers. As I said, it is very important, not just to get an insight on which objective is more important, but also to make sure that your stakeholders are standing right behind you when you are using it for your prioritization decisions. Use multipliers consistently until the business objectives change. So until you know for sure that the focus of the company is changing, the objectives are changing, use them as consistently as possible. Do not change the weightages just out of the blue. Then assign multipliers to features that contribute to the objective. It's a very simple exercise that we will see kind of later on. So for this particular exercise, like as I said, there are 3 different objectives, right? You have to scale transactions up by 40%. You have to improve the NPS by 50%, and you have to expand the reach to 2 million additional monthly active users. Now the multiplier that I have chosen is 3, 1, and 1, because for me, I believe that the company has most focus on scaling the transactions, and then NPS and reach are also in focus. They are also important, but then I think in multiples, transaction is something that the company wants to focus most on. Now, if I go back to the feature table, I again added a new column for multipliers. And in that multiplier, I have 3 columns for these 3 objectives. I have marked the weightages for each one of these objectives. So 3, 1, and 1. Now what I'm doing is I'm looking at each feature and I'm just marking the business objectives where this feature will create an impact. So for example, scan and buy. Is it going to scale the transaction? Probably yes. It is going to have some impact on the transactions that people make. It will also have impact on NPS, basically a huge impact on NPS, because the product becomes much more user-friendly, usable. But reach, probably not. I'm not getting more users acquired because I have a scan and buy features. It's only when somebody already downloads and install the application, registers for the application, when they will get to know about this feature. So I'm not doing anything to do with reach. For support for regional languages, I'm not actually scaling up the transaction because the monetization, features are not changing at all. The way in which people, check out or how they add medicines, that is not changing. But the NPS is increasing because now maybe there are people who are not so comfortable in English. They get to use app more easily. So the NPS is increasing. And also the reach, because now I'll be able to market the application available in many different regional languages, and people who were not using it earlier because of that barrier, the language barrier, they can get on board as well. So NPS and reach are the 2 metrics that probably is being impacted. So on and so forth, you look at each one of these feature line items, and then you try to map what are those different multipliers, the business objective multipliers where these features are having an impact. Now, the next step is simple. You just replace the tick marks with the actual weightage. So like for everything in the transaction, you make it as 3, where it is marked. For NNR, you do it 1 and 1. And wherever you don't see a tick mark, you just put it as 0. And that is what I've done here. So now you have a table, a multiplier table, where you have all the 3, depending on what is the impact that the feature is making in each one of these objectives. And now the next step is just add them up. So when you add them up, you will have a cumulative sum, a number of all the multipliers. So now you have the EIM, the 3 columns, which are ready for this backlog, right? The next step is just calculate priority. And the equation for priority here is you just multiply the evidence, the market evidence that you have, the impact of the feature, and sum of all the multipliers, right? And that is what you see in this table. You have the evidence, the impact, and the multipliers for each one of these features. The next step is going to be just multiply them up, and you will get the priority. And that's what we are going to do here. So when you multiply all of these 3 columns, you get a number, which is the priority column, the priority for each one of these features. And then you just sort them up by order, and you will get a list of features by ordered in sense of the priority. Now, one question that you might be thinking about, many of you, is where's the effort? So see, here's the thing. This particular framework focuses on what is important for the company. What is truly important, the most important item to build for the company to achieve its objective, being aligned with the strategy. It does not take into account the effort, the engineering effort. The next step from here is going to be that you talk to your engineers and you try to get a sense of cost on each one of these features. And then you make a decision on when in a particular planning cycle something should be picked up. So if out of these set of priority features, if the top ones are the ones that you really want to focus on in this particular 6 months or a quarter, you go back to engineering and see whether there is sufficient investment available for you to put in that. If not, go and get more engineers, probably, because that's a much better way to get something built, which is much more important for the company. I'll not just go ahead and pick up something in the low priority order just because it is low cost for me. I want to build something which is more and more important for the company. So try to see what the cost is. If the cost is beyond what you have, go and talk to your leadership and see if you can get more investment for the items which are higher up in the priority order.